Hey guys, lovely to see you all today. So many of you on art, which was nice to see, and some of those really beautiful drawings that some of you are doing, which is fantastic. So I'm really proud of you all. So today's a bit of a hump day, isn't it? Wednesdays are always a bit of a hump day. So it's quite nice just to take some time out, and I hope you enjoy this next chapter of the story of the Iron Man. So now you know where we got up to, where they were going to get all the armies in the world were all going to join together, and they were going to try and get rid of this space bat. So let's see, ladies and gentlemen, what happens. Here we go. What a terrific attack. Rockets, projectiles of all sorts, missiles and bombs, shells and flamethrowers, everything was tried. The smoke of the explosions drifted out over the Pacific like a black, crawling continent. The noise of the battle shook the world almost as much as the landing of the Dragon had done, and for much longer. Then the noise died down and the smoke cleared, and the peoples of the world cried in dismay. The Dragon was actually smiling. He was smiling. Aircraft flying really close photographed the vast face smiling, and the picture was in all the papers. It was smiling as if all it had been was tickled. Now the peoples of the world were worried. They were all great fighters, all spent their spare money on preparing for wars, always making bigger and better weapons. And now they had all tried their utmost to blast this thing off the earth. And what was the result? Because that's what happens, isn't it? Lots of countries decide that they spend lots of money preparing all these weapons and things. For what? And all the Dragon did was merely smile, and not a scratch could be seen on him anywhere. Human weapons had no effect on it, but that wasn't surprising. This creature had come from the depths of space, out of the heart of a star. Nobody knew what it was made of. Perhaps it could not be destroyed by any means whatsoever. And now the space bat dragon spoke again. It gave the peoples of the world 1 week in which to prepare its first meal. They could prepare what they liked, said the dragon, but if the meal was not ready in a week, then he would start eating the cities and the towns. The peoples of the earth, the kings, the presidents and the ministers, the farmers and the factory workers and the office workers began to get scared. Now what would happen to them? They would like to say the monster didn't exist, but how could they? There it was, covering Australia, staring out over all the countries of the world. Now the little boy Hogarth heard all about this. Everybody in the world was talking about it and worrying about it. He was sure that his friend the Iron Man could do something to help. Compared to the space angel dragon, the Iron Man actually wasn't very big. Of course, the Iron Man was only the size of a tall tree, and the space bat was the size of Australia. Nevertheless, Hogarth had faith in his friend the Iron Man. He visited the Iron Man in his scrapyard and talked to him about this great monster that was threatening the earth. Please, he said, please can you think of some way of getting rid of it? If you can't, then it's the end of us all. The Iron Man chewed thoughtfully at his favourite little tidbit, a juicy, spicy old gas stove. And he shook his head slowly. Oh, please think of something, cried Hogarth. If this space bat dragon licks all the life off the earth, that'll be the end of your scrap iron. There'll be no people left to make it. The Iron Man became still. He seemed to be thinking. Suddenly his headlamps blazed red, green, blue and white all at once, and he stood up in a great grinding voice. He gave his commands. Hogarth danced for joy. The Iron Man had the most stupendous idea. The Iron Man would go out as the champion of the earth against this monster from bit more of the next chapter because that one was a bit short. So this chapter is called the Iron Man's Challenge. There was no time to be wasted. The Iron Man allowed himself to be taken to pieces, arms, legs, body, head, all separate, so each part could be flown out to Australia on a different airliner. He was a little bit tricky to be flown out in one piece. At the same time, a ship sailed from China, loaded with great iron girders, and another ship sailed from Japan, loaded with fuel oil. The Iron Man had ordered these. The girders and the oil and a team of engineers were unloaded on the beach of northern Australia, near the Space Angel's Spacebat Dragon's neck. Then the Iron Man's parts were landed at the same spot, and the engineers fitted them together. He stood up on the beach, and he shouted his challenge. "Sit up!" he roared. "Sit up and take notice, you great space lizard!" The space lizard sat up slowly. He had never noticed the fussing of the boats and the aeroplanes down there on the beach near his neck, and now he gazed in surprise at the Iron Man, who seemed very tiny to him, though his voice was quite big. The Iron Man spoke again. "I challenge you," he shouted, "to a test of strength." A test of strength. The Spacebat Dragon couldn't believe his ears. A tiny little creature like the Iron Man challenging him to a test of strength. He simply just laughed, loud and long. And he peered down at the Iron Man, while the echo of his laugh was still rolling round this earth. He peered down out of the sky at this odd little iron thing on the beach, with its even tinier men scuttling around like ants around him. "And if I prove myself stronger than you are, then you must promise to become my slave," cried the Iron Man. The dragon just smiled. Aircraft flew around, watching the amazing conversation between the Spacebat Dragon and the Iron Man. Ships out at sea watched through their telescopes. "And if you accept my challenge, then you're a miserable, cowardly reptile. Oh, I beg my pardon. If you don't accept my challenge, then you're a miserable, cowardly reptile not fit to bother with." The Spacebat Dragon was so astounded that he agreed. "Why," he thought, "when this silly little creature has finished his antics, I'll just lick him up and eat him." So the monster agreed and watched to see what the test of strength was to be. After all, if he wanted, he could flatten the Iron Man barely with one eyelash. The engineers had fastened all the girders together in the shape of a grid. A girder is like a big iron beam. A huge iron bed the size of a house. Under this, they had made a steel-lined pit, and now they poured fuel oil into the pit. The Spacebat Dragon sat back and watched. And then they lit the fuel, and the flames roared up fiercely through the bars of the grid. And now the Spacebat Dragon got his first shock. The man, the Iron Man, was stretching himself out on his back on the grid among the flames. His ankles crossed, his hands folded behind his head, just as if he were in bed, while the flames raged under and around him. The monster stared down, and the Iron Man smiled up out of the midst of the flames. The flames became fiercer. The grid became red hot. The Iron Man's hair and elbows and toes became red hot. His body became first blue, then black, then began to glow dully. He was getting red hot, and still he smiled up at the monster, and still the flames grew fiercer. And now the Iron Man was entirely red hot. Pretty soon he was almost white hot, and still he smiled, out of white-hot eyes and with white-hot lips, and all the time the space-bat dragon stared down in complete astonishment. But now the fuel was all burned away. Suddenly the flames died, flickered, and went out. The white-hot Iron Man sat up, stood up, got stiffly off his glowing bed, and began to walk to and fro on the sand, cooling. He cooled slowly. He went from white to orange, from orange to red, from red to black, as he walked coolly swinging his arms. Now at last he spoke to the monster. And I'm going to leave it there, because I wonder what he's going to say to that monster. It's a pretty big, brave thing for him to do, wasn't it? But we know how strong the Iron Man was. I wonder what you think his challenge is going to be to the space dragon. Okay, my little Zoomers. Sleep tight. See you tomorrow.